All right. Well, welcome to our virtual edition of Founders Talk, which is a response to kind of how the world is nowadays. Everybody's virtual, but we're happy to have Dr. Conway, who is a professor of international business and social entrepreneurship over at Rollins. And so we're going to talk about customers today. And so not customers, customer problems today. So I want to welcome Dr. Conway. How you doing today, Dr. Conway?
Very good, thank you. Given all of the situations, I feel I really am I don't want to say, I really am acknowledging my place of privilege, right?
Yeah.
In that I have work, I have a safe home, and so I'm trying to really be appreciative of that and not be as stressed out by everything else that's going on in the world, and to help those who don't have this place of privilege that I'm sitting in, because I recognize it every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that that I realized, which is a problem that people are solving, which we'll get into, problems in general, is that because of this event, everything is moved virtual, and the realization came around that that there are still a large segment of our population and populations who don't have access to the internet, and as a result cannot access these services or tools that we currently use. And so there's this, especially in education, and now it becomes like this this divide that will grow because students can't access it because of their income or location. So I mean, it's a problem, right? So you recognize, like, oh, like you would think the assumption is everybody has a computer, everybody has the internet, and the realization is no, they do not. So it definitely is. You say, like, wow, like I'm pretty privileged that I can move through an event like this in a way that is, although it's disruptive, is minimally disruptive to my life. Whereas, like you said, there's people who this is a large disruption for them financially.
Yeah. So. And of course, being entrepreneurs, right, it's also an opportunity for us. And I know that the work, for example, that Move Up is doing, right, is very mobile based. Right. And I think that for those of us who are doing, whether it's education like you and I, Kyle, or otherwise, that to think about the platform that people are listening and engaging from. And that's part of a really good introduction, right, to the customer problem. Do we understand the situation, the constraints, the lives of our customers?
Correct. Absolutely. Well, before we get into the problem, how about you kind of tell us a little bit about your work at Rollins, and more importantly, your work that like your background that led you there.
Yeah. As I was thinking about that, and I think I had an opportunity to present to some of the Raleigh Fellows, the entrepreneurs, before, and I talked about, like, kind of where my passion space is around women's empowerment. But I think for understanding our conversation today, what's really important is that for me personally, I have what I call 3 lenses of the world. The first lens is one of marketing, because my PhD is in marketing. I worked professionally in marketing before I went back and got my PhD. The second one is international. You might guess that from the complicated multi-hyphenated last name. And also just the work that I do, both in social entrepreneurship and in marketing, has always had an international flavor and spin. And actually, this is the longest I've been home in the country in probably 2 or 3 years. And I did have to evacuate a country a little bit early. Thankfully, again, a knowledge base that I had was get out now. Don't wait for someone to tell you to get out.
Right.
And the third lens is that of social impact. So understanding how marketing, how international business or business in general has a social impact, has the potential to have a social impact, and has both positive and negative externalities. And so that has, like, always been my lens and my vision. And I've found ways to slip those 3 things in to what maybe was not an apparent connection. And so that's why I would say that I'm kind of an entrepreneurial, or an educational entrepreneur, or edupreneur, you could say. And so coming to Rollins, and as a reminder, I teach at the Crummer Graduate School of Business right within Rollins. It was really finding a place that valued those things, that one of our, of our pillars at Rollins. One is international, one is entrepreneurial, and the third one is leadership, which allows us to focus on the things we want to do and what we want to accomplish. So that's kind of what brought me here. I think what keeps me here is that Rollins and Crumers values things like this, which is connecting the community to the educational institution, and just the ability to work with awesome people year after year, whether those are students or colleagues or community partners like yourselves. The rally, I have to say, I don't like the word fellows, so sorry that just that female
fellows, got it.
Fellows, right? Yeah. So I'm going to just call them rally entrepreneurs. So the rally entrepreneurs working with y'all and learning so much from what you guys do, because that's what makes my classroom more exciting, is telling stories and bringing you into the classroom.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool.
That's kind of how I'm here and why I'm still here, because those of you who know me, this is the longest I've ever been in one place in my life.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that background. So today's topic is about problems. We all have them. How as it relates to business, and maybe there's a nuance with social entrepreneurship, how would you define problem?
Yeah. So, as I was thinking about this and the customer problem and the whole social lean canvas, right? The good news and the bad is when you get a professor on, they have to scope out before they can scope in. So I just want to scope out for a second, and say that the question that you're asking is really important. What is the customer? Who's the customer? What is their customer problem? And the reason I look at it as really important is for two things. Number one, as a researcher, it's a very under-researched area. So in social entrepreneurship, you see a lot of research around organizational structure. So several of you, like Blossom and Angela and Smart Ag, are working in hybrid organizations. That sort of stuff has really been researched a lot. And so there's a lot of both practical and academic knowledge, but marketing and customer problems and the perspective of the customer and understanding the customer journey is fairly under-researched. So that's both, again, a challenge and an opportunity. So for me as a researcher, right, it's really an opportunity to work and to tell the stories. There is, however, a lot of that can be borrowed from other areas for your entrepreneurs, for the rally entrepreneurs that are working on this, looking at what is social marketing, how we do a lot of attitudinal change for consumers. So that comes out of the social marketing field. And then nonprofit marketing, like what have nonprofit marketing, and for me, marketing includes branding and all that. So what problems and advantages and disadvantages have they seen for that? And the beauty is that there's an opportunity for you guys to tell your stories in multiple audiences, right? For the entrepreneurs to tell those in multiple audiences, and for us to teach the next generation, which I think is really important, because the students are hungry for good examples of how to do better, right? And that's how we advance the field, which ultimately as social entrepreneurs, we're looking to not only advance our organization, but to advance the field and to advance a movement toward more business with social impact and more entrepreneurs creating social impact. So that's like sort of my scope out.
Right.
On that, if I would scope back in and say, like, define the customer problem, I would start by first saying a lot of social entrepreneurs have no idea who their customers are. So I talk about like finding the customer and defining the customer. So within within consumers who are looking to buy for social impact reasons, right? You've got what we call the LOHAS consumers, a lifestyle of health. So for Blossom, for example, you guys are looking to sell to that segment of LOHAS consumers, a lifestyle of health and activity and social impact or sustainability. So they're looking for some products, right, that are helping them to live their value system. If I look at like demographically, so the customers for, for Synod, for example, and you've got what I call a marginalized customer, right? And so how do you reach them? Right? The problem could be, who are they? How do I reach them? And then how are they changing? So the customer that you have today, because this is a long-term venture for y'all. So the customer you have today, please don't think that that's going to be the same customer you have in 3 years, the same customer you have in 5 years. So as you build your canvas, I know that Kyle and Ben, I've always said this to you, the canvas is a starting point, but it's a live document, right? So continuing to redefine or reimagine who your consumer is. And the other challenge, and I think of this both for GoodThreads and then for MoveUp, is that you have multiple types of customers, right? So the problem with the customer definition is you've got, so GoodThreads, right? You've got your final consumer, but then sometimes, and it's also true for Blossom, your customer is also part of your production. And so then you get into sort of a stakeholder view of that. But how do you be sure that you're working appropriately with positive social impact for both the final consumer, right? And how you're educating them about why your product is better, even if it's more expensive, right? And then for MoveUp, you've got a customer who is your microfinance, but then you've got the customer of the loanee of the microfinance. So
yeah, that's the thing that we get into a lot. I feel like, Dr. Conway, with social enterprises is this, like, we've got customers and users, and taking seriously the problem of the customer while also understanding the kind of different and unique but equally important challenge of the user, and encouraging social entrepreneurs to take both of those problems seriously in order to get a success. I feel like we spend time on that because it's easy to get those two confused, or to run them together, or pay attention to one and ignore the other. But it complicates things, but you need both of them in order for the product to really go. You need to understand both unique challenges and be hitting them both.
Yeah, and so exactly as Kyle's saying, that's why we don't just call it the customer, right? If you look at what the model is, the social impact model is not just the customer, it's the customer problem. So in commercial entrepreneurship, we talk about what is the job that your product or service does, right? What is the job that it fulfills? So people don't buy the drill, right? They buy the hole. So what I need is a hole in the wall. I don't need a drill. The drill is the mechanism that gets me the hole in the wall.
I never thought about that. Like, they don't buy the drill, they buy the hole. That's
So I have to have a drill that gives me different size holes, if you will, because my painting is, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds.
I heard someone say one time that the average drill gets used like 12 minutes in its lifetime, because people need it for a job, they buy it, and then they forget they even have it. It just sits in the garage because they didn't really want the drill, they just wanted the hole in the wall. Right. That's really well said. I like that.
Yeah. And the beauty of that, what you just said, is, again, for an entrepreneur who says, therefore, if you only need the hole, let me set up a rental business where you can rent that instead of own it.
Yeah. That's where I heard it, actually. Somebody pitching me on a rental business.
Yeah. You mean my idea's not new? Oh, darn.
So based on just what you've said to this point, there's in social entrepreneurship, unlike just regular entrepreneurship, there's two sets of problems. There's both a social problem, and then there's a business problem, or a problem that the business is trying to solve for a customer who's buying something. And so they need to hold both. And then then you said, well, most entrepreneurs have difficulties identifying what that problem is because they don't understand who their customer, and I would love to unpack your thoughts on like why that's the case, right? Because if you're starting a business, the assumption would be that you understand or what the business or what the problem is, and that's the reason why you're starting it. So basically what it sounds like you're saying is that there's a whole lot of business being started without people really understanding, who don't have no clue. They're just starting something for a customer, and they just made up a set of problems for a customer that they just don't even know.
Right. So I might phrase it, if I could, like a little bit kinder. I don't want to say that they don't know, but I would say that sometimes as business entrepreneurs or startups, we think we know. Right. And so one of the things that I know we talk about, like a whole lean startup thing, is get out of the building and talk to your customers and observe your customers and understand what it is that they want. And so if I go back to Goodthreads, right, because you mentioned some products, you talked about belt buckles and keychains and or not belt buckles, excuse me, but the belt itself on the needlepoint. And so then it becomes really, is that what the consumers need, and is that what they want? And how do we develop the product broader? Because I only have one waist, and I only have so many things that I need a belt for, right? And so how do I go on to that? So understanding that final customer, and then understanding how they change over time.
Well, I think also, like I was going to say, but don't you think, Dr. Conway, too, that social entrepreneurs have this unique, it's like extra easy for social entrepreneurs to get distracted because they're so enamored with the problem they want to solve in the world. So so it would be very easy for Blossom to say, this soap is employing people with special needs. You should buy it, and not pay attention or take the time to understand who's the customer that buys artisanal soap and why are they buying it. Because they're so enamored with employing people, they forget to do the hard work of surfacing who their customer is and what that customer problem is, regardless of the problem in the world, right?
Yeah. So what I would say is, I would love for, in your example, Blossom, to be completely obsessed with the problem. What I want for them to not be obsessed with is their solution to the problem. Mm. You see the difference? You see what I'm totally trying to do there? So exactly, if there's social problem that they're looking to make advancement towards, because I don't think any of us as social entrepreneurs, and I mean this with all humility, solve a social problem. We move toward reducing the impact, right? Yeah. But if Blossom is really obsessed with that, finding employment and training people with, if I'm using the word properly, Rob, with some mental disabilities, and they're looking to get them trained for the next, okay, then if I'm obsessed with that, whether it's soap, whether it's shampoo, whether it's candles, I have to do the work from the customer's point of view to say, what is it that the customer wants, instead of, and then explain to my customer why it's so difficult for me as Blossom to rapidly change a production system, because I'm dealing with employees where change might be, and this is not my area of specialty, but change might be a little more difficult or take a little bit longer to apply, right? And so that is that communication. But I hope you can see what I'm saying. I want them to be obsessed with the problem. I don't want them to be obsessed with their solution to the problem.
Sure, yeah. And both problems, right? I hear you saying be obsessed with your social problem, but then also equally be aware and acknowledge and address and explore the problem of the customer.
Exactly.
And that's one thing I feel like we encounter a lot, Kyle. I don't know if you agree, but like that social entrepreneurs sometimes become so impressed with their social problem, which they ought to be, that they then jump to the product. Like you're saying, they jump to their solution without like exploring their customer base and the problem that their customers have.
Right.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that, Ben, and yeah, Dr. Conway, that's something that we run across, and I don't think it's isolated just to us, but you know, like it's out there as people begin to build stuff build stuff, which is without really, as you said, fully understanding the customer and the problem and what are the levers that causes them to purchase or engage something. And so they get to so because they don't do that, they build, and what happens is that a lot of time and money and resources is pent up or utilized, and then they get down the road and they realize, well, wait, this is not what people aren't buying this. Like, why aren't they buying this? Right. And then as a result,
and then we
now
think
tear all that down.
Yeah. And we think that the customer is wrong.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which, sorry, right? It doesn't work that way. So that's why, and I know Blossom, you mentioned it, like, what are our desired outcomes? And so your outcomes, you gave us some good outcomes in terms of employment, learning, meaningful employment, and then replicating that business. But I didn't hear anything about like a sales volume number or the types of customers or distribution. And there's two other things that I want to say on understanding the customer problem. And this is what I tell my students in marketing is, just because the customer didn't buy from you doesn't mean they didn't buy.
Right.
Right. So if you are actually serving a need for your final customer, the question is, where are they getting that need served? Where are they getting the hole from the drill if it's not for you? And here's where understanding your consumer is so important, because, and think about this, like when we were maybe in college or in high school or just starting out in I couldn't afford to buy a drill. So like I took a nail and a shoe and who knows what to create that, right? Or I used tape, despite the fact that everybody told me not to use it on plaster walls, right? I taped things on there and then dealt with it when I moved out 5 years later. So consumers often solve problems in other ways. And so what are the other ways that they're solving that problem? And the only way that you know that is to get out and observe the customer.
Right. And they have to be careful, when you use the example about people aren't buying the drill, they're buying the hole, that you can get caught where you're trying to say, look at this drill that I built. It's made with plastic and it has these things on it and blah, 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 blah. And you're just like, buy this, buy this, buy this. And, yes. and what really they should be saying is like, because of these things on here, on this drill, because of these things, it's easier for you to drill a hole. You can do it faster, better. And it's like, that's a small nuance, but we often see where entrepreneurs will describe their products in terms of like the bells and whistles and the features and the shiny things, but they never really discuss and get down to the heart of what the real thing is, right?
Right. And at the risk of, because I'm trying to use examples just from the little introduction that you guys, the Riley entrepreneurs gave, just to sort of hit home with that. And I'm going to connect what you just said, Kyle, to Angela, what you said about your business. So you gave us a lot of, because here's the other customer problem, is communicating with the customer. So you gave us a lot of communication from your perspective, meaning the business perspective, meaning look at my shiny drill perspective. And then at the end, you gave this beautiful statement. You said, grown in your neighborhood by your neighbors. That was the first time that it was like, oh, wow, that has meaning to me as a consumer or a potential consumer. So if we can not be enamored by our own children, right? Because that's what a business is. It's like a children, and everyone knows if you have a kid, it's he or she is the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the most, et cetera, et cetera. And to be able to step aside from that and think about from the customer's perspective.
Yeah,
right.
That's awesome.
What does this mean to the customer? It means, food where, It means you get to buy food in your neighborhood that is grown by your neighbor. And that increases social solidarity, which is what we need right now in this time of social isolation, right? Is social solidarity.
Yeah. So this is perfect for segmenting into the next thing that I want to walk through. Is just kind of like, if we all agree that understanding the customer, really truly understanding what problems they're facing, are there some activities that you feel like that startups should focus on when trying to understand these customer needs? Are there a set of activities that you can recommend or that they should be walking through in order to better understand that? or could
there
help them
is.
understand.
And as I frame these set of activities, what I want to remind us as is we're right, again, we're social entrepreneurs, and multiple definitions of what is a social enterprise and what are social entrepreneurs. But many of you rally entrepreneurs are working with what I would call either marginalized or vulnerable populations. And so when we talk about key activities, I think we have to be really sensitive to the fact that if you're working with marginalized or vulnerable populations, and because my first thing is going to be get out of the building and get to know your customer, you have to understand that those customers have potentially either been ignored their whole life, or they've been asked what they want and then taken advantage of once they've told what they wanted, right? And so we as social entrepreneurs have to have an additional element of empathy. And I started talking about like my place of privilege, that I have to understand when I'm working with women in India in micro enterprises, and I'm working with or in Brazil, who have dealt with so much, that I'm coming in with just layers of privilege. And how do I build the trust to get to their actual real needs? And that takes time. So I think it's the activities, right? Get out of the building, be with your customers, but be with your customers with a very strong lens of empathy and a very humble or with humility, right? In other words, that you don't understand what their needs are. You've built a product or a service that you believe is going to address some of those, but you don't live in their shoes, right? And whether that's the microfinance company, right, for Move Up, where you're like, what are their sales goals, right? And the whole Latin American microfinance issue got out of control because sales, it's kind of like the precursor to Wells Fargo, but we won't go there. But right, sales.
Yeah, I was going
Sorry,
to say,
Ben, go ahead.
no, I was going to say real quick that I'm the kind of person who would run past that like empathy, and because it feels like soft skills that like I just need to get my answer and keep building my company. But I like the push on that, because if people give me the answer they feel like I'm looking for,
Yes.
or the answer to get me to go away, I'm not finding the problem that they'll actually spend money on solving. They're just like getting me to go away.
Yes.
And so doing the hard work of surfacing, getting them to feel customers actually safe enough with you to be able to share real need, then you can develop something that they'll be willing to spend money on, because it's
right.
a real problem. And so I think that's a really good point, that normally me and my build, make stuff, I wouldn't take the time to listen that carefully or build that kind of trust, even in a customer survey sort of way. You have to think about that.
Yeah. So you've got, and on one element, the social, some of your entrepreneurs have very vulnerable, marginalized customers. On the other, if I go back to Blossom and I talk about that low-cost consumer, overly super, whatever word I can use, hugely, right? I hate that word. Skeptical customers. So they don't tend to believe the corporate, and this is true of our younger consumers as well, that corporatization of the message, right? So again, it's a delicate balance of communicating from a place of empathy, communicating about the needs of the customer, avoiding social response bias, which is what you just said, Ben. Like, let me just tell this white woman something and get her out of here because she's just annoying me and I have to sell today, right? And building trust around that.
Yeah, I think when you say that, I think that it becomes all the entrepreneurs that I've encountered who have been very extremely successful. They actually are individuals who have lived or walked in the shoes and have dealt with the problem from like either a job or they've just done it, right? So I think about a friend of mine who sold his company for $275 million after 7 years, and I was in Austin with him back in 2013. They came out of the industry and they were in the PR industry. They were trying to figure out what their PR spend was and measure it, and everything that they had was insufficient, and they realized that they started building things and imagining what they really needed, and as a result, they ended up pulling out of the company and starting a company on their own, and to solve that specific problem. And they felt it was big enough, but they had a very intimate understanding, and I think that puts an entrepreneur in a very unique position. I'm not saying that, you know, me as a Black man living in America can't go over to, you know, Syria or Turkey and develop a product or service for them, but I feel like Reem is more capable of doing that because she is a Syrian woman refugee living in Turkey, and she has an intimacy and a familiarity with the product that I'll never have, and so I'm at a disadvantage. And so we see, so you know, in the spectrum, I can imagine that there's groups of people who resonate very well with who their customer is because they were their customer at some point, and there's some who don't, and so they just have a harder time.
You know, what you're reminding me of, Kyle, is what I call the fallacy of hero worship in the entrepreneurship world. So Reem is working with Suzanne, and they're each bringing the skill set to the solution, right? And so sometimes what we tend to do, at least in the United States, right, is this hero worship of the entrepreneur. They did this work by herself, right? She did this all by herself, and look at how, when in fact there's a team behind there. Right. And so one of the other things, going back to your question about what are the activities, is like, you know, the verbiage of find your tribe, right? But build a team, find your team, understand what your strengths are, and then find someone who complements those strengths, not who's going to tell you how great you are, but who's going to challenge you and appreciate your skill set with another skill sets. When I do the work at Global Links, one of the first things I say to students, because we train students to mentor female entrepreneurs and micro entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs. And the first thing I say is, if you are here to help someone or to change someone other than yourself, you are in the wrong building, in the wrong room, at the wrong time. We are here to understand what the scholar or what the entrepreneur knows, what I know, and together create a solution that works for the entrepreneur ultimately. So I think that's another really important activity is you don't have to do this alone.
So,
right?
So you say, okay, activity one was get out the building, meaning, you know, like with the purpose of getting out the building is so you can get in front of your customer and just be present so you can observe the problem. Then the next thing is having empathy and not running past, so that they're trustful enough to reveal what the real problem is. Right. And then the third one, I may be missing one, but a third one that we just talked about is a team component, and it's an understanding of, like, for example, Reem, who's intimately familiar with the problem, bringing people alongside of her who can operationally help her fill in the gaps to be able to solve that. Or if you are operational and you're addressing a problem in industry, to find people in your team it's important to find people in your team who are intimately familiar with that and bring them on their team, because it leads. Okay, got it. Did I miss anyone, or is there a fourth one?
There's one more that I want to add, and that is to document. Okay. Entrepreneurs and are very good at doing, and sometimes not so good at documenting. And I know for part of Susan's laughing, I can see that. I might have hit a spot there for Susan. And I know that as part of the presentation, right, that you guys are helping the entrepreneurs to develop, and that we and Rally and the community are really looking forward to seeing, is that you document the cost of acquiring a customer. Right. And so that's very important. That's a step that you need. What I want to do is challenge to remind that you also have to document the cost of keeping that customer. So in other words, once you acquire them, right? So again, defining the customer problem. Once I acquire them, it doesn't mean that I get to keep them forever. Right. And so they change, their situation may change. So it's an iterative loop of communication and of understanding. And I want, if I can, So Kyle, you're telling me when there's time, because my classes are 3 hours long. So
No, you're good. You're
uh,
perfect.
I want to give you an example of that, of kind of forgetting to change with your customer and forgetting to document the cost of keeping your customer. And some of you guys might know, I for more than a decade, I did a lot of volunteer work with 10,000 Villages, which is a fair trade organization. I've written some cases on them and acquiring customers. And then what happened is the demographics changed. The average customer, when 10,000 Villages first started, and they were very entrepreneurial, they started in this field of fair trade and of very similar to Good Threads, right, of employing women, mostly women. About 80% of their producers are women, and then measuring the community impact of that. But what happened is the average customer started to be like me, right? 50-year-old. We even had a name for her. I think her name was Wanda. And not Towanda, for those of you who remember that movie. But Wanda, and she was like 48 years old and high middle social income, right? And so that is who everything was geared around, right? What she did in her home, what she bought, and the type of jewelry she purchased, and what her price point was, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened is 10,000 Villages, missed the competition that came along, and they missed the customer change, where now the majority, right? First of all, if your average customer age is 50, you got a problem, right? Period. Ask Toyota, right? You got a problem. Second is, as you get this new
Wait, what's
customer,
the problem? You just kind of ran by
they
that.
stop buying, right?
Okay.
So as
48.
once you hit 50 to 55, you generally our discretionary consumption reduces, and we become what's called in marketing, we become laggards. We are no longer really, in general, right? I'm generalizing, of course.
Yes.
As someone who's over that 50 curve too, right? But we're generalizing. We don't buy as much as we did when we were 20 and 30 for lots of different reasons. We've already accumulated everything, or our life. So anyway, the 10,000 Villages customer changed. Suddenly the average age became 25. Wow. Right? So where they communicate, how they communicate, what they buy, their style, not to mention the competitive world completely changed, and 10,000 Villages missed it. And we lost, I say we, right, over a decade of being with them, almost half of our stores closed. So there used to be 3 stores in Florida, 3 or 4 stores in Florida, plus a couple of pop-up stores. Right now, the one in Winter Park is the only one in Florida. So it's traumatic. And we know it's traumatic, again, David, to go back to you and Good Threads, because we know what happens when those products don't sell anymore, right? That means that those women don't have employment, which means they have to take their kids out of school, which means we're back to multi-generational poverty.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really long-winded way of saying document acquiring your cost of customer and the cost of keeping the customer, and understanding that that customer is likely to change over time. So
Yeah, that's it. That's really interesting, because I can see how in a lot of the fellows, their products and services, how like the customer over time could evolve, or they could solve the problem for them, and the customer no longer is with them until so what you're saying is like, okay, like you have to just constantly monitor who your customers are and the people interacting and engaging your system, be responsive to that. But then it also sounds like you're saying that you kind of have to start thinking ahead a little bit, because it's like, okay, like once I've hit this first problem, do they evolve and I can no longer capture them, or do they evolve in a way where I can capture them and still bring value to them?
Yeah, so exactly what you guys say all the time, right? That the social lean canvas is a living document. So you don't present it and then go, ta-da, I'm done, right?
Mm-hmm.
I made my presentation, I'm done. You're constantly revisiting it.
Yeah.
And evolving with your customer so that you are continuing to meet their needs, right? You're continuing to find, to give them the best solution to create that whole that they want, right? Rather than enamored with selling the drill.
Yeah.
Yeah, because your customer changed. And if you just focus on the problem you identified at the beginning, you won't realize that you have a new customer with a new problem and you're selling the wrong thing to them now.
And again, remember, we're a little bit obsessed about our social problem, right? So if I go back to Sinnad, right, and I say in a beautiful world, maybe in 5 years or in 7 years, right, your goal of, you said it so beautifully, from happiness to integration of the Syrian women into Turkey. So the Syrian women are now becoming integrated. Two things happen. You have the next layer of refugees, whether they're Syrian or others, and you can choose to serve them. Should you also, I don't know the answer to this, of course, should you also look to, now that they're integrated, either how do I incorporate them into providing this continuous solution, or how do I just provide another service for them? Because if I want my business to grow, it's the next level of service. And what does that look like?
Yeah. It's really interesting. Ooh, all right. And I know you know, initially when I came up with this, when I was like, okay, problem, like how much can you talk about the problem, right? I mean, problems are problems, but there's obviously a lot that you can talk about this, and it's a very important topic because, I mean, that's what it's all built on. If we're not solving something socially or commercially, then it's just like, then we're not bringing value we can't create a solution that brings value to those individuals or communities. And so I want to walk back through because one of the things is that has been alluded to, is that the problem may not be real, but then the problem could be real. It seems like there's levels to it. The problem could be real, but they're not willing to pay for it, right? And so there seems like there's like that becomes like the next thing. Okay, you identify the problem, and the problem is real, but is it a problem that they're willing to pay for? Like is that, are there, I guess, is there activities or things that people can do to try to, I mean, besides just putting it in front of them and saying, hey, pay for this, and will you pay for it? That may not be, could be an activity. It could be the way that you talk about something. Like I kind of talk about like that, like getting someone to the point where they really understand that know that this is a real problem.
Right. So I think if I understood what you're saying correctly, I think you have one really good example among your social entrepreneurs for that very thing. And then I want to share an example with an organization that I work with a great deal in Mexico. And the first is, if I look at Move Up, right? So what is the ultimate, right, goal of the digital education is that these final borrowers, right, are using the money in a way that is enhancing their social wealth and economic wealth, their social and economic wealth. At the same time, we know that these are marginalized borrowers who don't have access to a lot of resources. So guess what? I want to talk to the microfinance company to pay for that service. And so then my communication becomes around a win-win for both the micro entrepreneur and for the microfinance organization. So the payee may not be the user, right, for the final customer, but I have the responsibility, Move Up does, to communicate with both of them.
Yeah.
So this is one way, right, to think about how do I get the final consumer to pay, is I quote unquote have to find someone else to pay, but then I have to convince that someone else, in this case the microfinance organizations, that it behooves them to pay because the repayment rate goes up, the re-borrowing rate goes up, right? And so those are metrics that you want to measure in the folks who have had your education.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that that's a really good example that the rest of the Raleigh cohort entrepreneurs can say, does that make sense? Is there a way for me to frame my business in that way? Right. And so I think about Angela around that smart agriculture and folks who can afford food and not afford food. And then that brings me to like a sliding scale of pricing. So I don't know enough about Angela's business to comment on it. So I'll bring an example that I mentioned. she's actually a very good friend of mine, but an incredibly professional social entrepreneur. And her business model is based out of a foundation, which has some different elements in Mexico. But she runs, one section of her business is senior citizens' homes. And so what she has is a tiered pricing system, because they literally rescue, recover people from the street, right? To have them live their final years in dignity and death with dignity. Okay, those folks can't pay, but it's clearly a social need that needs to be met. And so what they've done is used other resources to purchase 2 other tiers of senior citizens homes, a very top tier and then a mid tier. And they take those monies and roll it down into the organization. So that tiered pricing, are there people who can afford to pay, and how you can use that money, re-implement that money, right, on your chessboard, right? Or if you're biblical, I guess you could say, steal from Peter to pay for Paul. I think that's biblical.
No,
help me out, Ben.
It works.
Right, of finding that tiered pricing. So I think that that's another way. And then for Blossom, it's about being and communicating with that consumer, that low-cost consumer who can afford it, but who has a lot of alternatives, and why your alternative makes sense. So that's branding and storytelling.
Yeah, it feels like it's harder to. I've always found it harder to build something that solves someone's, I guess, like maybe it's a lifestyle, or like if they got a problem, like a hard problem, like there's a hole in a wall, they need to put a hole in a wall, like I could build a product for that, or they need to reach customers, because there's an operational need for that to take place. But like when it comes to like lifestyle stuff, it's harder for me to solve problems that are connected to people's psychology, right? I've never really fully been able to understand like what the science is that goes into that, which triggers someone to see something and perceive it as being good. And it just provides just a lift in terms of their lifestyle that they're willing to pay for it. Like, I'm not sure how that operates.
Well, I'll say 2 things. Low-cost consumers might buy the first time for the mission. And Ben, you know this for coffee, right? I might buy your coffee the first time for the mission, but if the coffee is no good, I am not coming back.
Yeah.
So it's this balance of the social mission and the product. And I think for Blossom, N of 1, just me speaking, who you lovingly sampled your product to, this is going to be a challenge for you, right? The quality of the product, the consistency of the product, because the social mission will only get you so far. But the beauty is, again, understanding. So yeah.
But you don't think that people will be willing to continue to pay for something if it's a perception that it makes them better?
So from a marketing perspective,
like for example, let me give you an example. This is I don't know, I shouldn't know this, but fashion.
This is going to be interesting.
There's women in the United States. I'll just leave it there. They get into this fast fashion stuff, right?
Right.
And one of the groups is called Fashion Nova, and Fashion Nova takes fashions that are designs that are well known and have a certain perception to it, and they build these things. But everybody knows that the quality is not good. But somehow they figured out how to get people to pay for it and to continue to pay for it. Not good, high quality made products. And so that's just that, that's interesting to me.
But go back to your initial question. What's the customer problem? Yeah. Those people are not your customers. And sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Well, and the problem they're solving for isn't clothes that will last forever. It's the image when they wear them. And so then this meets that problem well enough that they're willing to part with dollars for it. When you said that originally, I thought of that book, Dr. Conway, Out of Poverty, where he talks about, he takes the principle of social enterprise to the farthest degree to see if it will solve problems and find something he can sell to people that live on less than $1 a day. Because he figures if they're willing to spend money on it and they live on less than $1 a day, it will actually be something valuable to them. And delivers a water pump with like a little foot-powered water pump that increases subsistence farmers' yield enough that they make money back, more money. So he uncovered a real problem. And it feels like to me, if we uncover a problem that people aren't willing to spend money on, it's not a dear enough problem. Like, we need to keep doing research until we find a problem that they're willing to spend money on. And if we feel like the customer base that we're serving is so poverty stricken that we can't deliver a product that they can sell, then we begin to look for advocates in that space, like you talked about, where we might, in the case of MoveUp, find advocates who buy the product for them. But in the case of MoveUp, I hope we can get to a point where then, after they've seen the value that it delivers, they begin to spend their own dollars on it because it's delivering such strong value for them. It's meeting such a base level need that it's worth them spending money on it as well.
And then they start to spend it for their children. Because if you look at like Bangladesh, the question became, what about the next generation? So we uplifted all these people through, my gosh, I just lost his name, Ethos, the social business model. But what happened was we found the next generation of the children from that business growth had no interest in continuing it. And so as I think about MoveUp, and you're now currently working on the entrepreneurs, how do we help the entrepreneurs' children to understand the importance of financial responsibility and financial management and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
And Ben, I actually know the example that you're talking about. I just used it when I was in Brazil last month, or early this month, or whatever. But I think that is very true, period, full stop, very true. If you're someone like Blossom, that the social mission is in the production, but they're producing a product for a certain type of consumer segment, it's a little bit different.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's go ahead, because I'm watching the time here. Let's go ahead and open it up to the fellows. If you have questions, let's go ahead and get them out there. Everybody's mic is muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself for us to hear the question.
This is the shyest group of entrepreneurs I've ever met. Sorry, Milena, go ahead.
We're not shy. I think it's just funny being on mute. And then you have to take yourself off. I always forget where it is. I absolutely loved everything you just said, especially it was so obvious that you understood exactly, what we're doing with MoveUp, with the whole idea of the payee not being the same person as the end user. And I love the idea of the sliding prices, because that is really our goal here, is that, as these end users who are being, who are basically being paid for by the microfinance institution, as they become more economically resilient, there should be a desire then for them to add in, right? For them to start taking more advanced classes, receive certificates, pay for those certificates, that type of thing. And something I really love that you said too was talking about their generation, their kids, right? So when we were doing these really valuable customer surveys, it was so fun to go into the field, because almost always when I was talking to mom, their 16-year-old daughter was there watching videos about how to do her hair on TikTok. And so automatically, I'm starting to identify these things. Or even, for example, mom can't read, so the daughter's reading the survey to mom. And so I just, I want to kind of explore that a little bit more with you. How, I've even thought about, how do we engage them now? Because a lot of these 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds, they already have fiscal responsibility. A lot of them have already dropped out of school to help their families. So I think it's definitely a new opportunity for almost like a double segmentation of our market and our approach. What do you think about doing that? It will definitely diversify the customer almost in two different ranks, but I think it might be an easier way to get people to already start adopting those sliding prices.
Mm-hmm. A couple of things that you're making me think of, Marlena. The first is when you're talking about like moving a person from free to pay is very difficult. So if ever anyone has an opportunity to go back to what Ben said, to even just charge a very, very nominal fee you've created a psychology in that person. And Sanad, I think you guys have been dealing with this business model question as well, because it's very difficult. Like, I've gotten this for free, now you want me to pay for it. But one way to do that, because you mentioned, Marlena, certificates and things like that, is that when I get these certificates, do I in fact on my next loan get lower interest rates?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so by continuing to have this education, I am continuing to get, which I am now paying for on a sliding scale. So it could be based on the size of your revenue of your business, based on the number of employees that you have. There could be different social indicators, but by getting that certificate that I've now paid for on a sliding scale based on those indicators, do I in fact get a reduced interest rate, or do I get some more liberal payment, whatever interest rate just popped into my head, but whatever it means, right, of that. And then just like teenagers, right? So you're mentioning you've got maybe the business owner who's illiterate, and so the teenager is reading to them. Again, why should that labor be free?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we incentivize a teenager? A lot of ways, but one of them is to recognize that their labor has value.
Mm.
And so what does that value mean? It could mean monetary value. It could be, kind of, what's the word we use? Like intrinsic reward value, something that they like, that they get to do now because they've been reading, but they should feel like their time, their effort has value. Then they bring that forward into that sort of next thing. And maybe then they become even the teachers. So it's not only teaching their mom, but 2 or 3 other women in the community, kind of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, because one of the things I heard her say was about recognizing that there could be 2 customer sets in there, and how do you approach that? And I think that one of the things that as especially at this stage, right? So we keep saying entrepreneurs, but I want to say early stage entrepreneurs. One of the things we have to be cautious of is attacking too many fronts at one time, right? And so we have to think about these things and like what is our, as it says in the social lean business model canvas, like what are our early adopters or our low hanging fruit that allows us to propel to the next set of customer sets, right? Yes. And so. Marlena, you may find that there are two things, and there's 2 things or 2 different customers. So the question becomes, which one is low hanging and propels you to the next one, versus trying to attack them both at the same time, because you only have so many resources at this stage.
Absolutely.
Super important, Kyle. Super important. And actually, that was one of my things over here on the screen that I forgot to mention. So super important.
Cool.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Any other questions from fellows? Well, we have a few more minutes, 8 minutes.
Yeah, Dr. Conway, I got a quick question. So a couple of times it's kind of mentioned about the problem of the customer changing, right? So for Blossom, obviously there's a lot of things going on in the world right now that we're not trying to be paralyzed by, but we're definitely trying to be analytical. Especially being in the soap making business, right? So hand washing is clearly people are going to be buying soap right now for different reasons than 2 months ago. We're talking about how cute our seed paper is. I don't think people care about that as much anymore. They care about what germs are being killed by using soap. Also, we kind of felt like we landed on corporate giving, but now, we're kind of going to have to reassess that on what does corporate giving look like after some of the impacts of the coronavirus and what's going on. So I guess my question is, what is our best way, you think, to kind of reassess the impact of everything going on, in particular to our business and maybe our customers' spending habits? Is there anything that activities we can be looking at, or it's hard to compare examples, right, on other things that have occurred that we could look at on impact on spending habits or motivators, but what would be your advice kind of proceeding?
Yeah, so I think 2 things come to mind as I'm listening, and please realize this is a little bit like top of head sort of thing. Right. The one is, I'm going to go back to what I said about finding partners. So if you're talking about soap, right, and right here in Orlando, right, because you and I are both sitting in the Central Florida area, you've got Clean the World. And they've been repurposing soap. I don't know what their supply is right now. Could it be possible that you become a supplier for them? I don't know, but what the beauty of that is, to your point, they're going to be, depending on where they're putting it in their packet, they might be a little looser on the packaging, so you could save some money there, or on the quality, right, of the scenting and all of that sort of stuff. So it's a question, right? It's a question mark. I don't know that it's an answer, but it's a question mark that I would want to ask. And who else is there? And then don't think of corporate sponsors as, like you say, gift giving. Yeah, that's great. But as you say, gift giving, especially this year, is going to be way down. But there's still going to be businesses that need soap. And because everybody's buying soap, there will be some businesses that don't have access to soap right now. So who are those businesses, right? Is that, I can't say like boutique hotels, because no boutique hotel is open right now, but what are those businesses? So like, I'm really good at asking questions. I don't know that I necessarily have the answer, but that's the line of thinking that I might go in. Because you're right now, we're not, okay, I have a whole thing about antibacterial soap, which I'll try to avoid going off on. But we're not buying for scent, right? We're buying for clean and durability. So is there another element of your soap that's better? Because like some soaps, you use them 3 times and but the bar is gone.
Right. Yeah. Rajiv, Dr. Conway, Rajiv, actually shared something. I don't know if he put it in the Slack channel, but Ben and I think we brought it up during our check-ins with them last week, is that he was saying that that if you're not considering how this event impacts your business model, then you're in jeopardy of not making it. And so like your perception that this world changing crisis has fundamentally changed how people view soap, and it has caused them, it has layered a problem on that. You're right. Like with Blossom, like will people buy soap? Like maybe the number one reason becomes now they're buying soap is they're looking to see how effective it is. Not only does it look good, smell good, but is it effective at killing bacteria? And as Dr. Conway said, does it last long? And so that becomes now part of your packaging, could become part of your packaging, could be how you market it, how you make the soap. I mean, it finally, so I think that what you did is in considering how this world changing event impacts your model, and because it's changed probably the problem, or it has changed potentially the problem. I think that was very wise of you to be able to do that. I mean, I just think just staying aware of that and constantly assessing these things.
In your case as well, it's going to change the way you're producing.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So those are some questions to ask as well, which again, I don't know the answer to, because of, and I don't know your employees as well as you know your employees. But if they can't come together, right, and what can they do what can they do from home that you're keeping them engaged and healthy? Because ultimately that, and as you say, you're focusing on your residential facility. That would lead me to say you have a residential facility. There are other residential facilities that have different types of residents, excuse me. What are they doing for soap?
Right.
Because their budget is going to be really hard hit as well.
Yeah. So, all right. I think we have time for one final question. If anyone has a question, we have about 2 minutes. I'm shocked that Sanaa doesn't have a question, or Angela. All right.
Look, she had so many things she was telling me. I just was trying to absorb it. So, I didn't want to disrupt the thought processes in my head.
Smart.
Because, like I totally embraced what she said to me about, not how I'm telling my story. That's what I need most help on.
Yeah, that's good.
Start with that. Grown in your neighborhood by your neighbors. You got to start with that, Angela. Lead with that.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's cool.
And, you know, to all the entrepreneurs, I would say, look, I'm only a phone call away, and good news, bad news, or a Zoom call away, or whatever. Good news, bad news. This is my sabbatical, which is why I'm supposed to be somewhere else. But that means that I'm not teaching right now, which means I have a little more flexibility in my time. So I offer to you in all sincerity, if you want to have a follow-on call to brainstorm some things. I'm not saying I have answers. I'm really good at questions. And I'm really good at predicting what other people are going to ask. That's why I was saying I'm not smart. I'm just really good at guessing what the professor's going to ask. I'm very good at that.
Yes, exactly. Well, Dr. Conway, we really appreciate your time today and doing this Founder Talks on customer problems. Your insight and wisdom has been received and will go out into the world as we archive these digital things. And so a lot of people are going to be able to glean large nuggets of wisdom from today's talk, both locally and abroad. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. You're a sweetheart. Right. And I just again want to say that I'm very humbled and inspired by the work that all of the entrepreneurs are doing. So keep at it. These are tough times, but your work is even more needed.
All right, cool. Virtual pound.